Hi, I'm Nan Simonson, and I am a whole food, plant-based health and wellness coach. I am also the author of Aging Powerfully. And the point of my book, which I wrote nearly 3 years ago when I was turning 70, was that I realized that turning 70 wasn't the beginning of the end for me if I chose to live my life with the precepts or using the precepts of the College of Lifestyle Medicine. And that is taking control of lifestyle. And that's what the book is about after a relatively brief memoir, because I went through decades with an eating disorder. All that's behind me. I've been whole food plant-based for 5 years. The eating disorder went away, I say. I was able to overcome that about 5.5 years ago. So what are we talking about today, and what was this resource? Every night we take a walk, we see people all the time. That adds to community. That's even one of the modalities of lifestyle as medicine, and that is community, being around people, feeling the warmth of togetherness. It makes a difference. Loneliness is deadly. And we were walking, we see people we know, and it was a couple down the street, and they told me they own a bakery, and their bakery is wonderful. But what do you think you have in a bakery? Lots of butter, well, cheese like cream cheese, sour cream, in a lot of very rich things. Well, they said, we are trying to incorporate more plant-based meals into our diet because they know we are plant-based, and I was thrilled. And they said, oh, did you see the recipe? And here's the interesting resource. Did you see the recipe in the Connection magazine, which is Costco's magazine? And I hadn't. We had been traveling. Well, I got the magazine a couple of days later. In the meantime, they had sent it to me. But this little article, little teeny article, you know the size of their magazine. And the funny thing is, on the very top of the magazine article, or this article about vegan mushroom stew, was this guy with a skewer of, what is that, 245 of their skewered chickens, and they make a ton of money with their skewered chickens. They don't want us to go vegan. So this was in a little place in the corner of a page, or the inside of the page, with this on top of it. You know what? I'll take whatever I can get, because Costco is trying really hard to give us healthier foods in the form of organic foods, as well as some vegan choices, as well as gluten-free. Just don't make the mistake to think that if it's there and it says healthy or gluten-free or even vegan, that it's a healthy food. There are so many processed vegan foods. There are so many highly refined, highly over-processed, gluten-free baked goods. You gotta, I'm not going to get into all of this because I could go on and on, but you got to look at the labels. You got to look at the ingredients. You're looking for whole grain, whole food. You want to look at fat first on the label, because every gram of fat is 9 calories, and 9 grams of fat, which doesn't look like a lot, is nearly 100 calories. On a 120 calorie item, you're eating nothing but fat. I'm done. As I said, I could go on and on. So I have a pan that's hot. I brought up fat because one of the things I don't do is I don't do added oil. And you may think, man, what about healthy olive oil? How can you live without that? You know what? We can save thousands of calories a month, which means pounds a month, by not adding oil. I'm not saying don't eat oil or fat in food. I eat avocado, I eat nuts, I eat seeds. My chia and flax that goes into my oatmeal every morning has fat, as does my organic soy milk. Soy is 30% fat, but they're the healthier fats, and they're bound with protein and things. So no, I don't add oil. The recipe calls for adding 3 tablespoons of oil. That's 360 calories in this recipe that possibly my husband and I can eat in 2 meals. In other words, every time we eat our portion. It could be 70, 80, maybe 100 calories worth of nothing but fat that we would never miss if we didn't use it. So no fat. Their instruction was to put this 3 tablespoons, which is almost a quarter of a cup of oil in, and then saute mushroom. The pan is already hot. I'm putting in the onion. I don't have to put oil, ever, ever, ever. As a matter of fact, if I'm afraid that it's going to burn or I need to get a little bit of moisture to cause it to weep, an onion, especially the white onion, will weep beautifully. I would then, and this is the way I keep my broth, I keep a 1 gallon freezer bag in the freezer, throw in scraps of vegetables. I even have a video on that, and you can find it online at YouTube, Ma'am Simonson. But you see what happens? You see how that bubbles up? What it's doing is deglazing the pan, and instead of now the fear of burning, I'm getting the onion caramelized. Well, I want to add to this carrot and sliced celery. I'm going to cook these for about 8 minutes to soften them. And then I'll get back to you. And I'm even going to cover it because it'll slightly steam it. I could, and what I do with onion a lot is caramelize it this way. I could leave the cover off. I could let the onion brown a little, add broth, brown a little, add broth, and it really caramelizes it. But I don't have to do that with this recipe. There's a lot of flavor in here. I don't need to enhance it with caramelization, which if I did that, I would do the onion alone and then add the celery and the carrot. But we're gonna do it just the way the recipe says, sans oil, okay? So as I said, I'll get back to you in well, the 8 minutes I'm going to let it cook, and then we'll take it from there. All right, this is, hands hot, this is what we're looking at now. We didn't need anything but a little broth, and the vegetables are soft enough so that when I finish this recipe and I finish cooking it, which is really just a few minutes to get the herbs mixed in, and then about 10 to 15 minutes after that to soften the lentils. You'll see all of this. I would be able to serve it. I don't have to cook and cook any further to get the vegetables to be tender enough not to have too much of a crunch. So what I'm going to do now is I'm adding a pound of halved white mushrooms. Now, do you know that white mushrooms are the young version of crimini mushrooms, which are the young version of portobello mushrooms? And I'm going to add a combination of 3 herbs. We have oregano, we have thyme, and then we have sage. Sage is that special flavor that you will note right away when you eat a stuffing. And I'm not saying stuffing for an animal, I'm just saying a stuffing mix. Almost all stuffing mixes have sage because it has this kind of an earthy, wonderful flavor. So I'm just tossing this for a couple of minutes. Get it blended. I think I'm going to add just a tiny bit more broth. Make sure I'm doing what I want to do. Okay. I'm going to add the garlic as well. I have 6 big cloves of garlic, not minced, but just sliced. Everything is kind of big and chunky in this recipe. We halved the mushrooms instead of slicing or chopping. And this is a vegan mushroom stew. It's very much a stew. I like my stews to be brothy, and I like a brothy soup much more than a really thick soup. You may not feel that way. You may want your soups to be more on a stew-like consistency. So even though the recipe calls for 3 cups of broth, which is what I'm going to put in, you may decide you want a little more or a little less. You can make that decision. Okay, I've tossed it around a bit. It's kind of toasting, not really toasting the way you would with some of the hotter spices like cumin and curry when you're doing an Eastern dish like a curry. But it's still tossing them or toasting them a little bit. So what I'm going to add now is I'm going to add the potatoes. And these were little white or golden potatoes. The recipe calls for halving them. I don't want to put that big of a piece of potato in my mouth. I think I'd rather enjoy it doubly. And so I halved and then halved again. And so in other words, I quartered the potatoes. And I'm now going to add flour. Now what is the flour going to do? It's going to help me allow this to, well actually by tossing it, it's allowing the flour to brown a little. And by browning, I just mean cook a little. All right. And then I'm going to deglaze this pan with 2 interesting ingredients. One is a salt substitute, but it also adds umami. Can you guess what that would be? How about soy? And then I'm adding balsamic vinegar. And this isn't the balsamic that I usually use from Napa Naturals or California Balsamic. That is the 4% acidity vinegar that you can buy with all the flavors in it. If you watch Chef AJ, she uses that kind of vinegar, reduced vinegar, all the time, as do I. I love it. But this is regular balsamic, although I used one that was an aged balsamic, so it's a little bit thicker. So what does deglaze mean? We have now this flour that is, even though we can't see it under all of this, sort of sticking to the pan with the flavors of the aromatics, which is the carrot, garlic, onion, and celery. And what this is going to do is that this liquid, it could have been anything. It could have simply been more broth, but we're really adding some very, very deep flavors here. I can hear it sizzle. And this is going to give this a wonderful, rich flavor. And it's giving it a wonderful, rich depth of color. Okay, now I'm adding the last ingredient. You know what that is? Well, it's not really the last ingredient, the last couple of ingredients. I'm adding, these are split red lentils. And I rinse them. I always rinse my legumes and grains, but I made a mistake once with lentils. I rinsed them and then they sat around until I was ready to put them into what I was cooking, and they glued themselves together, and it was a clump of lentils that I had a really hard time breaking up, even in water. So I just rinsed them. If you think of how they sit in silos and what could be walking around in those silos, I always do that. Now I'm adding tomato sauce, and I love Mere Glen because it's organic and they do a very nice job with tomato products. So it's 1 can of tomato sauce. And then finally, I'm going to add more of my broth, and I'm adding 3 cups. Actually, it's probably a little more because, as I said, I want it a little looser. And, I'm going to add a salt substitute, and it's from Local Spicery. It's a salt substitute that has a lot of herbs in it. Can I bring it over to show you? Oh yes, here it is. It's called Salacious. I was at a conference of Chef AJ's in Sacramento in September, and Local Spicery was there, and I really like their products. But there are a lot of salt substitutes that are available. And you can add salt and pepper, or you can go with a salt substitute. I'm putting in, from my backyard, 2 bay leaves. I love the idea of going into my backyard and picking my herbs, my thyme, rosemary, sage, as well as bay leaves. Now, how can you do that without growing a bay laurel tree? Bay laurel is, or a bay tree, is part of the plant name bay laurel. And it's called Laurus, the genus species is Laurus nobilis. Well, it wants to be a 30-40 foot tree, high and wide. And I have one growing right outside my kitchen window. And what do? I ordered from a nursery a 1 gallon pot. It could be 5 gallons. Put it in, but 1 gallon goes into even a small space. And then I just keep it small. I do this, it's not that small. I let it become a shrub that's about 3 by 3. And I don't let it get any bigger, because it will become a very large tree. And the value of that is that I can walk out, pick a stem that makes a very nice ornamental detail if I'm photographing a plate, and so it's a nice garnish in that way. And I can also use fresh bay leaves instead of buying the dry bay leaves. There really is quite a difference between them, and quite often I'll sort of crinkle them so that they're, we'll call it resin, can escape. Now look at this beauty. I'll show it to you. I'm going to bring it to a simmer, and then I'm going to reduce the heat after it starts to simmer. I think I'll cover it just to bring it to a simmer more quickly. I'll reduce the heat, and then I'll cook it 10 to 15 or 20 minutes, or whatever it takes for me to be able to pierce a potato easily. I have to confess, we're not eating this tonight. We're going out. It's Friday night. We do date night every Friday night. And I go to a restaurant and get a beautiful vegan meal. It's an Asian fusion meal, and they do a fantastic asparagus, we'll call it stir fry. I say light oil, and you can tell on the plate that there's next to no oil. They don't seem to be able to do it with none at all, but there are places that can do that for you. And that's part of date night. But I wanted to get this video done to release it again next week. And this was the only day I could do it. So the beauty is that when we eat this, we're going to have an even richer flavor, because any stew or soup that has a chance to sit overnight, or even several hours, the flavors marry and they become that much richer and better blended. So I'll be showing it to you. I'll even plate it to show it to you plated. And while I'm thinking about it, I very often will cook and double and triple recipes, because I value my time. If I'm gonna make this kind of a mess, meaning put out all of these little bowls for the mise en place, which means everything in place ready to go in, I might as well do it 2 and 3 times bigger, and then freeze it to be able to pick out of my freezer library to keep meals coming easily. Defrost them in the microwave at 70%, 60% for 12-15 minutes in a 5-cup freezer container, and have some wonderful meals right away. A lot of my soups I do that way, and then I enhance the soups with additional fresh vegetables, freshly steamed vegetables, or extra beans. You can do a lot that way. I had a curried butternut squash the other day that I added toasted tofu cubes to, and so I made a tofu, like a Thai curry, added some tamari to it, tamari sauce. Anyway, it was delicious. So think about meal prep in that way, doubling, enhancing, defrosting for quick meals rather than having to go to restaurants where they always add more fat, more salt than you really want, or sugar. But we do once a week, we do go, and it's usually here. What I wanted to say about this though is that I didn't double, triple. This will be enough for us to have 2 meals. And so I'll package the other part of it after we eat what we're going to eat tomorrow. And I'll serve it in about 5-6 days, and I'll relish in simply being able to reheat it. Why won't I freeze it? Because I don't like what happens when potato chunks, even small pieces, are frozen. They become a soggy, spongy kind of a, they develop that kind of a texture, and I don't find it appealing at all. So I've learned that I'll even take them out and toss them. I dislike them that much when they're frozen that way, a stewed potato. So this will still feed us for 2 meals. And it was pretty quick to make. Anyway, you'll see the end result, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Give me a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to Nan Simonson at YouTube, and consider my book, and find out what you can do to take whatever years are ahead of you and make them the best ever. I intend to take another 10, 20, 30 years and make it my best ever. That's what lifestyle as medicine can do for you. Have a great day. I know I am. Bye-bye.